In case you are not interested in watching and or listening to this video, I am going to give you the summary and the bottom line right now. So in summary, because of multiple planetary stations that are happening this month, the stations of Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus, and these follow the late April Pluto station, so it's pretty much in the same swath, same period of time, but these three are really going to seal the deal. We have a situation in which the country is changing, the world is changing as well. In terms of the pandemic, you can see that many countries are now attempting to open up and resume business in some fashion or other. And here in the US, the same thing is happening. However, because of the way it has been transacted from the beginning, and because we are still not in a place to conduct good testing, good tracking, it is very unlikely that the infections and death rate will go down. And meanwhile, as a result of not only these particular transits, but also how they interact and how they trigger his own chart, we have Donald Trump in a situation where, because he's feeling quite cornered and without many options left to play, he's going to ratchet up his insistence on creating an alternative reality and basically, to put it bluntly, to do more of what he likes to do and often does, which is lie through his teeth. So as far as the stations, we can see, if we push this astro clock forward, then the first one right there, Saturn, Sunday, Monday, is the Saturn station. And then Venus stations next, Tuesday, Wednesday. And immediately Jupiter joins. So then Jupiter is Wednesday, Thursday. So from Sunday to Thursday, there's a lot of planetary activity in terms of stations. And what is important is not only that they're stationing, signifying a change in direction, but also where they're stationing, in particular, in this case, the Venus. In the US chart, Venus is stationing really close to where the natal Mars is. In Trump's chart, it stations pretty close to where his Sun position is, as well as making an opposition to the Moon. So with USA, what we have is that it triggers the Mars position, Mars ruling the 12th, which is an area of health, points to that area continuing to be very, very important and very conflicted as well, because it's part of a square to the traveling Neptune as well. But I also suspect that this is going to herald the increase and improvement in testing and measuring, because Venus rules the health sign, the other health house, these two being the health polarity. Venus rules Taurus, and so a retrograde pattern indicates going back over something, which of course we know should have been done earlier on and it wasn't. And I think there's a very good chance now that as private industry has gotten more involved and the general flow seems to point to increased testing, which is likely to take place over the next 4 to 6 weeks. But in particular, we may see this during the middle 2 weeks of May, at least beginning, because that's when the Venus station is strongest. And the Saturn station points to the same thing, because Saturn is stationing in early Aquarius, and I've talked about this in prior videos, the fact that this sign in the US chart is related to the idea of data and testing, measuring, trying to analyze what is going on. And so Saturn going retrograde also suggests going back and doing that which should have been done before. And finally, returning to Venus quickly, keep in mind that it is in Gemini, and Gemini is itself the sign of data. Separately, it's also the sign of the respiratory system. So all the imagery is reflective of this, but all of this points in that direction. Meanwhile, with Trump, in order to understand this, consider Venus in his chart, Venus in the 12th. I've said several times before in other videos that this Venus position points to Trump's criminality, his underhanded way of doing things. And because Venus is the ruler of the third sign, the sign of communication, the house of communication, which contains Jupiter and Neptune, which therefore amps it up to a very high level, often very effectively so, even though it's negative effective. Nevertheless, these planets are tenants of the house. Venus is the landlord. It's the boss of that house. So this is the way he communicates. It's his favored way of doing things. And so then you can expect that if you put this planet in its transit over top of the sun, it's going to increase his tendency to do that during this period, which is going to be most intense during the 2 middle weeks of May, when Venus basically surrounds this sun. When planets station, they stay within a degree or two very tightly for a much longer period of time than usual. So expect him to construct elaborate alternative realities and to basically lie, which is what he does nearly always, but during this period it's going to be especially so. And of course, expect also a lot of resistance, because as all this is happening, Neptune is slowly but surely making its way to closing this T-square with the sun and the moon. And so he's going to get a lot of opposition. He's going to get a lot of checks and balances, or at least attempts at checks. And so my feeling is he's going to be quite uncomfortable, especially at the point where, when we look at the transit of the planets, we see that Mars, around when Venus goes retrograde, it's a little after, Mars is going to go into Pisces. And for Trump, when you look at Trump's chart, Mars going through Aquarius is not the worst place for it to be. Pisces and Aries are a lot more difficult, and that is what he's facing for the rest of the year, because it turns out first it'll do a few weeks in Pisces, the sign that squares his sun, Uranus, and squares his moon. Then it's going to go into Aries. He doesn't like Aries at all, because Aries triggers the T-square with Eris, Mercury, Neptune. And believe me, I've studied this extensively the last few years. Whenever planets are in cardinal signs, he squirms more than usual. And this is something that will persist right through until January, because of the fact that Mars will be retrograding for a period in Aries during 2020. So in conclusion, Don the Con in full deception mode as we go from May into June, and the rest of us trying to hang in there. As I've said before a number of times, don't listen to anything this guy says. Follow the advice of experts, follow the advice of scientists and doctors, and basically, if Don the Con says it, it's a lie. Ignore it.